Ladies and gentlemen, now today we're going to be having a bit of a chat about the Marvel Contest of Champions offensive tier list update for April 2019. And just as a reminder, this is offense, a champion you play, and not Alliance War defense, because, you know, the rankings are very, very different. There are champions that are good on offense, but terrible on defense, and, you know, vice versa, and all of that fun stuff. But anyway, we've got to talk today about the introduction of Nick Fury, Captain Marvel movie, and all their rankings and the need to know information. There have also been a few promotions and demotions going on that I think are going to make some people very, very happy. I've been keeping a very close eye on kind of the Act 6 content. You know, we've kind of got the next wave of the game coming, and I'm looking at champions that have been performing very, very well for certain people. So we're going to be talking about, you know, why certain characters have been promoted and why certain ones have been demoted there. But anyway, before we start, I want to give the standard disclaimer that Marvel Contest of Champions is a very, very expansive and complicated game, and this should be treated for what it is, a rough guide to what I believe are some of the most useful characters, generally speaking, in the game, because there are so many different modes of gameplay. You've got Alliance Quest, Alliance War, you've got story questing, you've got Labyrinth of Legends, you've got Variant, and depending on the mode of gameplay, the matchup, the node, you know, one champion can like rise above and be better than another one. So yeah, the game's just really, really complicated, and a tier list is never to say that this champion is always better than this one, because there are a lot of variables in the equation of who is the best champion. This is just a rough guide on a comparative spectrum to who I believe are some of the most valuable champions to have. And yeah, if you want to make kind of big rank up decisions, always look up some gameplay, think about what you're doing, think about the obstacles, and which champion is going to help you overcome those obstacles to where you're trying to get next. So yeah, that's pretty much the standard tier list disclaimer. Always super fun, man, but I always have to rattle that off at the start of the video. Now, to have a bit of a chat about the two new additions in this last month, we got Nick Fury and also the movie version of Captain Marvel, and both of these champions, in my opinion, are very, very solid god tier champions, man. I love both of them. They're very fun to play, a lot of very interesting uses as well. So I'm going to start by talking about Nick Fury. Now, Nick Fury, I kind of have three symbols here. I've got large benefit from awakened ability, because if you want that damage, you need that second phase. Large benefit from synergies, because ideally you want something like the Heimdall synergy or some sort of healing synergy, cheat death, to give him a bit more of a buffer, because he's the definition of a high risk and high reward champion. And we've also got this new icon that you may have noticed up here, which is kind of the somersaulting person doing a bit of a cartwheel to signify that high skill is required, because Nick Fury, he's kind of a balls to the walls, high risk, high reward champion. So to play Nick Fury well and get the big damage out of him and the big utility as well, you need to kill off the decoy Nick Fury and get to that second phase, which again is associated with the awakened ability, and then you degen down to 30%, and that's kind of where you're staying if you really want to play this champion well, because you can't you know, be above 30% for much longer in that second phase. So it can be very, very detrimental in certain matchups where there's fun and interactive damage, like Magic's Limbo, or like Starburst, Degeneration, like Mephisto's Aura of Incineration. So there are a lot of matchups where Nick Fury is very sketchy to play, and he won't necessarily work out too well, and that's why, you know, there's a very, very high skill requirement. But in those matchups where you can play perfectly and just absolutely annihilate the opponent, the bleed damage is absolutely insane. So Nick Fury, he has like a lot of potential, man, and also the ability to have unblockable and fully counter evade is not to be underrated as well. So there are certain matchups where Nick Fury is going to work really, really well, but at the same time he does have his disadvantages when it comes to bleed immune opponents whenever there's fun and interactive damage. So that's why he's quite not quite beyond god tier in my opinion, because I think like Archangel has a lot of the benefits of Nick Fury in a lot of matchups aside from the unblockable, but without the reliance of being in this very, very high risk phase and also not having the ability accuracy reduction as well that Archangel has. So yeah, I love Nick Fury, man. He's really, really fun to play, and I think arguably he is the strongest, if not one of the strongest bleeders in the entire game. So yeah, really, really good champion, man. Definitely deserves the god tier there. But again, bear in mind all of these requirements as well and his slightly quirky play style. Now, next up, we've got the movie version of Captain Marvel, who's just so much fun to play, man. I really, really love this champion. Captain Marvel movie is just all about getting to that binary ignition and then trying to find a way to throw off as many heavy attacks to stay in binary ignition for the longest amount of time, but also with a persistent charge mechanic. The first fight is always the worst fight when it comes to this champion, and the deeper you go in a quest, the kind of easier it is to kind of keep up those charges from fight to fight, and especially with a Nick Fury synergy, which doubles the duration of those charges as well, there's just so much benefit there, and it makes it much, much easier to kind of stay in that like god tier, slay and damage mode, which is really, really fun. But also Nick Fury synergies, mate, are great. There's so much utility in them as well, so he's great for the team. But on top of that synergy, he also has the 10% attack to all heroes if he's alive, or 20% attack to all heroes if he's dead. So there's just so much benefit from having Nick Fury in your team for synergies, especially if you have the movie version of Captain Marvel. But on top of all that insane damage, she can also shrug off all debuffs when entering binary ignition, and this allows her to easily get through nodes like Shock and Incinerate, because she also gains those charges whenever she takes energy damage. So if you bring her into like Act 6 on a shock path, man, she very quickly goes into that god tier damage mode and gets rid of the shock, so it's really, really nice, man. She saved me so many units when I was doing my run. She's also poison immune, she has lots of armor break, she's got stun on heavy intercept in matchups like Iron Man Infinity War and Medusa, also up to 12 seconds indestructible when awakened, and she triggers her binary ignition, so that can be very good for you know, all sorts of fun and interactive damage here and there for quickly bursting down opponents. But yeah, there's just so much that the movie version of Captain Marvel can do, and I think she is easily a god tier champion. Now that we've had a bit of a chat about the new additions, boys, let's talk about the promotions, because I feel like some players are going to be very, very happy to see Quake finally getting that beyond god tier recognition. And Quake is a champion that I've definitely really had my eye on over the last few months, and I cannot deny in the last 6 months there have been so many boss fights, so many encounters, so many challenges where Quake has been arguably in like the top 3 to top 5 counters for that fight, and has just made like so many new nodes and so many new mechanics like a total breeze. So yeah, Quake, just to give you a few examples, lads, we're looking at like Darkhawk, Thing, Mr. Sinister, Nick Fury, Aegon, Red Hulk, Diablo, Act 6 Sentinels. There's some really, really sick solos out there on YouTube. We've seen so many biohazard nodes as well, also for the last version of Variant, and I imagine the upcoming one, she's going to have a fair bit of use as well. So yeah, Quake, man, I feel like she's really earned that beyond god tier spot, and as more and more like super fun, unstoppable mechanics and like hit the opponent and something bad happens come in, Quake's just going to get better and better. So Quake, you know, she's a very tricky champion to master, especially when you're fighting like stun immune opponents, but people have done it, man, and there are some really, really, really sick Quake players out there. So yeah, look up some YouTube videos, boys. But I'm convinced now. I'm convinced that Quake is definitely among one of the top options in the game, and she's had so much value in the last few months that I can't really sit by and ignore it. So yeah, Quake to beyond god tier, lads. And then next up we have a champion which I have recently acquired and done a fair bit of testing on, and hopefully shown a fair few people like how insane this champion is for a lot of variant content, a lot of Act 6, and that is Proxima Midnight. Has been now moved from high demigod tier to god tier, and I think as we see more content with very, very chunky health pools between kind of the 200,000 to 500,000 region, Proxima Midnight is going to get so much love and so much value. I think especially over Christmas, I started to notice Proxima a little bit more because she was so insane for so many fights in the maze, because once you get a couple of missions completed, man, your specials are hitting so incredibly hard, and I think she's kind of been previously a little bit tossed aside by stuff like the Labyrinth of Legends damage cap, but as long as we continue to see kind of high health content without a damage cap, I think Proxima Midnight is going to grow in popularity. So yeah, her burst damage is just so incredibly awesome. She's awesome for Variant, a lot of Act 6 content. She's also great for a lot of Act 5 content as well, if you've got her like as a 4-star there, especially in Masochism as well, and she's arguably one of the best like big Iron Man Infinity War counters in the game at the moment. So yeah, I believe with, you know, Proxima Midnight, she's earned that god tier. Now, the next champion getting a god tier promotion is Mr. Anti-Fun and Interactive Gladiator Hulk. I feel like over the last, 6 months, I've got so much more appreciation for Gladiator Hulk, and I feel like with a lot of the content that's come out, there's just been a few more, fun and interactive mechanics, and just, you know, all sorts of, BS damage and, variant Act 6, and his Face Me mechanic is just so incredibly effective and viable for all of these scenarios with just, some rubbish, passive damage. So, you know, we're looking at Act 6 degeneration nodes in the first quest. He's insane for that. Starburst nodes, which seem to be popping up all over the place. Magics, Dormammu's, Mephistos, Dominoes as well, especially really, really stacked ones. He's got a heal block and also if you're under, I think it's 90 crowd excitement, a high chance to stun on the special 1. You've also got an innovate and stun on the special 2. He's poison immune. When you've got him awakened, you've got regeneration or even more damage potential. So yeah, there's a lot Gladiator Hulk can do to just win fights, be an absolute trooper, and just keep on going on and on and on. And I feel like this champion's increasingly more valuable for stuff like Alliance War, Alliance Quest as well. A lot of scenarios where he's very, very useful in various maps. So yeah, I love Gladiator Hulk, man. He's a beast, and I feel like he's definitely earned that god tier. Now, the next champion we have was a little bit of a tough debate for me. The Gamora revamp that happened earlier this month has given this champion so much damage, but you ideally kind of need that full buff synergy with Black Bolt to extend the duration of her Fury and Cruelty, and ideally you do need an interval where you can get a lot of heavy attacks in, and if you can't get those heavy attacks in to refresh the buffs and ramp up the damage, then she becomes, you know, a little bit lame to play. I mean, she's not the absolute worst when you can't get those heavy attacks in, but also it's a little bit difficult in a fair few matchups to kind of keep the aggressiveness up and also find intervals to weave in those heavy attacks. But in the right scenario, man, Gamora can have god tier damage, but the reason I've put her in high demigod tier is because the god tier is so competitive at the moment, and I feel like with a lot of the content we're seeing a really big need for a lot of different utility requirements, and Gamora, in terms of her utility, just doesn't really bring a whole lot to the table. She's got a fairly decent armor break on the special 2, guaranteed crits, but, you know, that's really about it in terms of her big utility. Her true strike off the special 3 is very weak. It doesn't last a long time at all. It's 11 seconds, man, which for a special 3, that's a very, very short true strike duration. So yeah, I really like the revamp to Gamora, and I think in the right scenario, man, she can absolutely shred the opponent. But I think overall, I think she's more suited around the high demigod tier champions that I would consider her kind of grouped in with. But I like Gamora, man. She's a really, really decent champion, but she doesn't quite make it to god tier for me, because I think for a lot of Act 6 content, the practicality of playing Gamora just doesn't work out too well. So that's the reason why I've got her in high demigod. And kind of the same thing with Carnage, man. Previously, I've had Carnage in god tier, and if you can bleed the opponent, Carnage is so much fun to play. There's a lot of damage there, but on top of that, he just doesn't really have any utility. And if I'm looking at other bleed champions like Nick Fury has the evade counter, and he's got the unblockable as well, on every single hit, and that's absolutely mad. And I think that's something that kind of puts him a little bit above Carnage, along with the synergies as well. So yeah, I like Carnage, man. In a matchup where you can bleed the opponent, he is arguably god tier, beyond god tier. But I think what we're seeing in a lot of, you know, Act 6 and variant content is there are just better options than Carnage, comparatively speaking. But I still really like the champion, man. I just wish he had a little bit more going for him. He needs kind of 1 or 2 more pieces of really solid utility to kind of make it back up to that god tier. But yeah, that's it. I think he's a little bit more suited in high demigod tier, because looking at all the god tier champions, man, I take all of these up for their various utility uses and additional perks over Carnage. So I think he's kind of grouped in a little bit more suitably with a lot of the high demigod tier champions, at least in my opinion. But again, it's only my opinion, man, and you can have a different one, and that's fine, boys. I think with a lot of the Act 6 content as well, we've just seen a real reinforcement in the value of a lot of the beyond god tier and god tier champions. Archangel shreds anything that can be bled and also poisoned. Domino is great for the heavy attack spam. Omega Red is so good for so many different fights, man, especially with the suicide masteries. Whenever you're fighting like biohazard lanes or bleed scenarios. The crossbones, he's great for that as well. Magic is good for all sorts of power control, just keeping the opponent in the corner with those intercepts. Blade is great for so many villains there. Aegon is probably one of the Act 6 MVPs. He is so incredibly insane. Corvus with the Suicide Masteries just absolutely shreds everything and does so much in so many different lanes there. Hyperion's great for a lot of the big old chunky Sentinels and bursting down so many different fights there. Medusa's great for all the big robots in Act 6, just dealing a ton of damage and being poison immune and shutting down all sorts there, mate. Spider-Man Stark Enhanced, just great for the damage and also the utility of having that kind of assisted evade there, but this boy is still slugging big time. Ghost is definitely one of the best champions for Act 6 overall, man, with the ability to, you know, dash back and phase away all of those debuffs and just cut through so many different fights. She's got an incredible amount of value. Then we got Void for all sorts of scenarios where you need to heal reversal, very strong Incinerate immune champion as well. Cap Infinity War is great for that very first quest and all sorts of little fights here and there where you've got to deal with kind of big evades, but Cap Infinity War is just a beast, man. He's just such a fun time. And Quake, yeah, works for so many scenarios where you've got very annoying evade champions, or need to worry about, you know, just bursting down something that has a bit of a negative effect if you hit into the opponent, like Biohazard, for example. So yeah, I think a lot of the Beyond God tier champions have been very well enforced, but amongst the God tier, there's just so much utility and clever ways to play around all sorts of the challenges that are coming up in the endgame of Marvel Contest of Champions. But again, mate, there are so many champions in this game now, it's getting mad, ladies and gentlemen. But anyway, what did you think of the April Marvel Contest of Champions 2019 tier list update? What do you think of some of the new champion rankings? Let me know in the comment section below. But thank you so much for watching today's video. If you did enjoy it, feel free to smash that like button and share it with your alliance. That'd be greatly appreciated. Aside from that, take care, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope that you have an absolutely fantastic day.